You know, as two people who've done a lot of traveling throughout their life, you know, what is your definition of home?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm writing this new and selected, like I said, and it's called Portable Paradise.
Okay.
And part of it is just like, you know, when you go somewhere, you take your home with you. You know what I'm saying? So like, I know you're a man who travels. So sometimes I'll go to a country like, say like I go to Berlin, yeah? And I realize, wow, if I live in Kreuzberg, I can walk to this cafe, see these things, see the one, and I like walking around town. So I'm like, okay, I have this type of access. There are these types of foods that I like. So besides those things, I just want to know that I have my family with me.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
My family is my home. And when I say portable paradise, it's just like, okay, if I take my family with me and I can keep in touch with everybody else, like I need to keep in touch with Nick. You know, I don't live in London, but me and Nick will talk on the phone and everything like that. I can keep in contact with Nick and a couple of my other friends. It's cheap for tickets. I was like, wow, I could live here. I could make a home here, but the strangest things make me want to call a place home. Like, can I walk around the town? But I don't know why. It's like, can I walk around town? Can I deal with the climate? Is there food that I like? Is the price of live? Can I have a nice house here? Can I, you know? So taking my family with me is definitely home. But also being able to communicate with my friends is definitely home too.
Nick, is there anything specific to being a writer that you look for in a home? You know, like, for instance, Roger mentioned cafes. Like, I have to do all my writing in cafes. I don't know what it is, but I need within walking distance from home, I feel like I need there to be a little cafe that can be my creative hub.
Yeah, I don't think it's physical things for me. I need almost spiritual things. I think, like, my wife thinks that she's a distraction to my writing, but she's actually quite an important part to it. I remember a point where I was at a crossroads with my writing, and I haven't made anything spectacular or anything like that yet, but I was like, I needed to have a family. I needed my partner, and I hadn't had children yet. And so for me, something I need, you know, like, it's weird, every night I'd like to go, when my children go to sleep, I like to peer in on them and just tuck them in. And just having that cycle, or like when my wife comes in and I can hear the door, and she's in, it does something for me when I'm sitting at my desk. I don't know what it is.
I understand. It's grounding.
Yeah.
It's grounding.
So I particularly like to work at home. I don't know why. I need solitude. And you know, we were talking about this earlier. Is that we actually we talk a lot, but actually, when we're not talking, I actually have a lot of time of thinking. There's a lot of time in my day when I'm not actually saying a word. And people find that funny. So my wife thinks I'm this very charismatic guy who talks a lot, who laughs or whatever, just talking thing. But actually, a lot of my day is spent, you know, when you're not actually writing something, thinking about the things that you might write or thinking about the concepts that are coming. And I think what's actually important for me is that think time.
I think that grounding is important. It's like sometimes in my own house, I have to, like, I might travel with music and be performing to like 1,000 people. But I come back home, I'm gonna have to clean my boy's butt and wash those dishes.
Yeah.
But before, I'll be like, I'll come back, I'll be like, oh, why do I have to do this? I'm a rock star. no, like that grounding is as important as that traveling and that, you know, that high. And without, you know, people like, it seems to me that people like, for instance, Amy Winehouse didn't have that type of grounding. And so she just floated off with whatever was her whim, you know? And I think that ground is important. But also too, I mean, I saw you talk in that festival in that conference, but somebody talked before you, Professor Henry Mainzer. And he talked about creative citizenship. And I've been taking on that a lot recently, you know? The whole idea that, you know, as an artist, you have to start debunking ideas of citizenship that don't work for you. And using your art to be creative, to construct new forms of citizenship, you know? And I think that's important. And that's important to a home, how you impact whatever skills you have to kind of create kind of forms the citizenship or create beacons for other people to say, I'm making a life like this, perhaps you can too, you know.
Yeah, and rooted in a community, do you think, and giving back to the community?
It could be rooted in a community, or it could serve as a beacon to communities.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying? It's like, it doesn't actually, you don't actually have to have the community, but you put it up there so that that a community can see it. And it may not be your community, a different community can see it. Like a Turkish community can see it. It's like, we're going to organize like this. You know?
Yeah. So, but something that I really love about your work, both of your work, is that I'm thinking of Chuck D again, who was talking about Gil Scott-Heron, and he said the great thing about Gil Scott-Heron is when he wasn't speaking about you, he was speaking about us. He was of the people, you know. And you two strike me as people who are of your poetry resonates so much because it deals with issues, even though it might be living in exile. You write about it in a way that seems to be relatable, you know. And could you talk to me about your methodology and how you manage to not float off creatively into these realms where you know maybe people don't resonate, you know, people don't connect with your work?
You know, the poet in society. I mean, if you look back in society, a poet is an important part of the jigsaw puzzle of society. And one of their permissions that they have is to float through the stratas of society. So you get permission to hang with the lowest of the low. You get permission to be with the highest of the high. And it's something that Roger and I actually we discuss a lot, is that, you know, that gives you access to knowledge. But, you know, when people hear knowledge, you can give people knowledge and make them feel inferior. Or you can give people knowledge and make them feel recognized. And I think that's what we try to do with our work. And I mean, we were just talking about this yesterday about Portable Paradise, and we were talking about you've got to remove all the things that make people feel like you're talking. I think when I was a young poet, one of the things that you could, as a spoken word artist, you could be accused of is you can be very preachy. You know, because it's because what's happening is you're getting all this knowledge drifting into your mind, and you want to share it. No, we shouldn't eat meat. We should, you know, or whatever X is. Right? But what's happening is that person's having a realization is that, gosh, I've been eating meat all my life. Now they think they have the right to tell everyone that they shouldn't. But what people want to see is, how did you stopping eating meat affect you?
And also too, it's like as an artist, more and more, it wasn't always the case, I feel like I need to represent someone or something. You know, and you can even go back to hip hop, you know what I'm saying? It's like hip hop represented, you know, Brooklyn. You know what I'm saying? It's like, and if it and ideas of relevance, if it doesn't represent anything, or it doesn't have something that has some form of representation, it can easily drift off to become irrelevant. You know what I'm saying? And you don't have to. This is just something I've been taking on recently. You know, it's like, okay, well, who am I? Well, I don't want to presume to talk for someone, but who am I representing here? You know what I'm saying? And it could be a very small community. It could be like Trinidadians in England. But representing someone is a good thing in art for me. And I enjoy, like, even, you know, people like Bob Marley, as popular as he becomes, when he's talking about Trenchtown, he don't have to talk about Trenchtown. Because he acknowledges that he's from there. He's representing them. As far as he go on Island Records, traveling all around the world, he represents some element of Jamaica.
And I suppose it's the case of if you represent something well enough, you can start at the personal and it will arrive at the universal.
Personal, and it will also be personal, or be political. You know what I'm saying? It's like, so you start there, and it's just like, okay, you're in that realm of representation. You know? I mean, some people don't represent anything, and they're fine. It's just something I'm taking on.
How about yourself, Nick? Because you know, I sometimes think of this idea of being black in Britain and being part of the Black British community, which quite often, you know, it feels like a big influence here is the Empire Windrush generation, and but you arrive at Britain in a sort of a little bit like, I feel like all three of us in a certain way, a slight periphery to that core idea of what it means to be black and British. So I mean, could you explain like where you're coming from and how you fitted in within the black community here?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm looking at, just as Roger's looking at this thing called the creative citizen, I'm looking at this thing which I term like the Metic experience or the Black Metic. So when you talk about home, which is a really interesting thing, you know, I'm a Ugandan, and when we say we're going home, what we mean is we're going home to Uganda. And I came to this country when I was 4, but by the time I was 4, I'd already lived in 3 countries: Uganda, Kenya, England. And so when you say what is home, home was where my mother was. You know, and I speak to my wife. I've actually lived with my wife longer than I've lived with either one of my parents. And I've lived in this country more than I've lived in my home country. So, with this identity, initially I struggled with it. You know, I struggled with identifying as Black British. I struggled with identifying as Ugandan because when I came here, I stopped speaking in my mother tongues. You know, so I had to embrace. I mean, I knew English, but I had to embrace English. It now became my first tongue, and I think that's why poetry means so much more to me, because it's a language in which I can speak and not feel I am the alien. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean?
You feel poetry can hold all your multiple allegiances.
Yes, without judgment. It's, as a poet, I am not judged for being Ugandan or British or Black or lack of language. But when I come here, I have to be recognized. The first thing people recognize this is my Blackness. Then they'll ask me, "Are you British?" You know, like always have to qualify. But as a poet, I always qualify.
As a poet, I wanted to ask, you know, like how Roger was talking about representing something or representing a community. Do you feel that weight in your poetry? Do you feel like you represent a certain group of people?
I think that's dangerous in the sense that, you know, I think the thing that writers of colour struggle with is that we are homogenized, and because we feel like we have to represent a group of people. I mean, don't get me wrong, I want there to be more writers of colour, more African writers, more, you know, Caribbean writers, you know, like that, people from the diaspora. But what I do feel I'm responsible for is telling the stories that aren't told. There are narratives that exist that are not being represented. You know, are not being considered. And it's just as we're losing the trees, we're losing languages. Just as we're losing languages, we're losing stories. As we lose stories, we lose part of our humanity. So I do feel responsible for that.
Also, too, you know, like being Black in England, there's a certain amount of, like you mentioned it before, that liminality. You're in between things. But that liminality is okay. But then Grenfell will burn down, and then I just weep. Because to me, that's people who are Black in Britain who died there. And I feel a part of that community. I feel like I probably know a few people who were there, and if I don't know people there, I know people who knew people who were inside there. And you know, and I feel like I felt that more than other people who were not part of the Black British community, who haven't been living in England and Black in 25 years. And you're right, it's not a homogeneous group. You know what I'm saying? There's an in-between space that loads of people hold, but still, there's something about being Black in Britain, you know. Yeah.
Dans notre quotidien, ces châtaignes.